So today we've got Alexander Hohenthal with us. He is the leader of Southern Sinfonia. Welcome, Alex. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So how long have you played with Southern Sinfonia for now?
I can't remember exactly, but it must be more than 10 years now.
More than 10 years, so you've really sort of got yourself involved in it. And do you enjoy playing with Southern Sinfonia?
Of course, otherwise I wouldn't be here.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I think that's a good reason. So how did you first get involved with the orchestra? Because you knew Roger, didn't you? I think you played with him
Exactly. I played in his former orchestra, and that's where we first met. And I met Kay subsequently, and she had the idea to introduce me to the rest of the musicians here. And the rest is history. I met David Hill, and we did our first concert together with I think it was the Four Seasons by Vivaldi, and that, and yeah, it was a very good collaboration and friendship, fraternity, everything, all that you wish for.
Yeah, of course. So it's turned out to be a really healthy friendship with the orchestra, of course. So what was your first sort of musical experience, would you say? And what your sort of inspirations, I guess?
I started quite early. I was 5 or so. And the earliest I can remember was my first public appearance. It was a little students' concert, and I played my 1 or 2 numbers that I could do, all under a minute.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, there was a lovely young girl playing before me, brunette, and really pretty, and I wanted to marry her at first sight.
When you were 5.
Being 5, exactly. And then I observed she was tapping her foot alongside with the rhythm, and I said, "Oh, cool, that looks cool. I'll do that." And sure enough, I got lost and I had a memory slip. Right? I'll never forget my teacher stampeding towards the podium and said, "Start over again, just start again." Yeah. And I did, and forgot to stamp my foot, and I did well the second time around.
Okay, good.
But it was a bit of a trauma.
So that it wasn't.
That's how I can remember,
Not too much of a trauma though, because it didn't put you off forever. No. So that's good. No. So what was that on the violin, that performance? Yes. Then? So how come you chose the violin then? Why the violin?
It was combination of circumstances. We got a female director of the music school, which in the early 1970s was not the usual. She was very ambitious and sent a letter to all the families in the city, inviting everybody to bring their kids to have them tested, rhythm and pitch, and then sing something, and somehow apparently I stuck out of the crowd, and because most of the kids were recommended flute or recorder you call it, and or maybe possibly guitar, and then when I entered the room, they said, "Well, this boy has talent, and we have a good fiddle teacher, a good violin teacher here in the town." And then my parents said, "Well, how convenient, we still have grandpa's fiddle up the attic, And, well, that's much too big for the young boys. Yeah. I can imagine. But, that's how it came together.
Yeah.
And I never had second thoughts about it.
Really?
It just felt natural to me.
Yeah. So did your parents play an instrument as well, or did it?
My grandparents did. My father just started and then quit. I understand that at that time, during the war, becoming a professional musician was not exactly the normal thing to do. Yeah. And everybody did something for a living, and maybe he was an amateur player in his leisure time. That's how it went.
So what do you think it is about the violin that you really took to? Because for me, obviously, being a flute player, I really enjoyed the sound that it made. And when I was younger, it was a really nice tune. Well, not when I first started, obviously. It was quite horrible when I first started. But,
likewise.
Yeah. But so what do you like about the violin? What's your...
It's exactly how you describe it. It's the sensation of the sound. And if it feels... natural to you. Yeah. And there's all kinds of textures and wind instruments have a completely different sound than string instruments, and the violin just felt right. Yeah. It felt right. I love the lower register though, and occasionally I like to pick a viola of a friend and play a little on the viola because I like the depth and the richness of it. But as I said before, no second thoughts. Yeah. Fiddle was right for me. So
why do you think it is, talking about the viola, why do you think all the viola are the butt of the jokes? Why do they always get picked on?
I'd rather not say.
Fair enough, yeah. In the violin, so what is your violin at the minute? What make is your violin? Is it really expensive? Is it really old? Is it more modern?
I used to go through a couple of instruments, and some of them very old, some of them outrageously expensive, including some Cremonese makers, some famous names. And then I made acquaintance with violins by Roger Hargrave, who is from Leeds and now works in Bremen in Germany. And I believe, honestly, that he's one of the finest makers, not only of our time, but all times. And I was so impressed with his work that I abandoned my Francesco Ruggieri violin, and since more than 15 years now, a little longer, I play his instrument.
The same one for the last 15 years?
Not the same one. The first one, well, when we moved into the house and had our first baby, there was so much work to do in the house. I sold my first fiddle and kept the second, and now my second became the first, and the third became the second, and now it's changing again. All based on different models and, of classical instruments, of course.
Yeah.
Stradivari, Bergonzi, Guarneri, and stuff. And,
so what is it when you say that he's one of the finest violin makers sort of in ever, as you said? What is it about him that makes his violin so special?
I think it's a mix of different qualities, playing qualities, which are often neglected. When you're young, you tend to pick a violin for its timbre, for the voice. And you often overlook that there are sometimes difficulties in the response or a certain unevenness between registers. But that has to be part of the whole package, and I think it matters a lot, especially the more professional you play and the more often you play in public, you have to have a reliability.
Yeah, of course.
And his instruments, they have a very good mix of quality, overall quality, a very personal timbre, personal sound, plus the playing qualities. And it's enough to play and perform a violin concerto with orchestra and be heard, and enough quality to play chamber music and early repertoire and classical and romantic, and the whole range has to be there.
Yeah.
And that's what I like.
So you mentioned that this is a classical instrument, so for listeners who might not know, classical instrument means that it's played on sort of after the Baroque period, so from 17th, mid sort of 1700s and later probably?
Mid 18th century, I would say.
And later on.
And then things didn't change much until the time of Violin and Paganini, where they introduced a slightly longer neck and the ebony fingerboard that is very familiar today. And ever since, nothing has changed really.
Right.
Except the new generation of Baroque players, they went back to the shorter neck and use of different materials than ebony for weight reasons and other reasons. And
So you mentioned the Baroque violin. Have you ever got a Baroque violin yourself, or a period violin?
Not yet, but occasionally I borrow from a friend.
Yeah. What do you like playing them? Those violins?
I like them. What I also like is to mix things. Use my violin, which would be considered modern setup, but I use gut strings.
Right.
And one of my bows is made in it's not a Baroque bow, but it's a classical, it's a traditional kind of bow, if you want. Yeah. And that works brilliantly, at least from my perspective.
Because it's obviously quite a different style of playing required, isn't it, for a classical and a Baroque period? So I guess it's quite a challenge to do both, or is it?
In a way, but I was lucky enough to meet so many brilliant musicians who are deeply rooted in the 19th century. And the bowing technique has changed a lot, and luckily I can reproduce different sounds, different ways of articulation with a bow arm, which is very, very helpful if you change forth and back from so-called modern, which is not all that modern anyway. Yeah. As I said, it's 19th century.
Exactly,
to the Baroque or early classical, and
So you talk about the classical period. So are your favourite composers to play the early classical period?
Well, I try to not make a choice.
Right.
Because whenever you make a choice of that kind, you're always unhappy when you have to play something else than your favourite. And
right.
And also, music is that rich and it's a whole kaleidoscope of different flavors and textures and sounds and everything, and I don't want to miss that. So
yeah, of course.
I deliberately make a choice of not choosing my favorite, and I try to make the one I play currently my favorite for the time being.
Yeah. So say you're at home, you've got your violin out. If you had to pick a piece from your music library at home, what would be your dream piece to play? To relax?
Well, it's not that romantic or poetic. What I pick has sometimes to do with practical properties of the material, because being a father of 2 kids, the time is limited.
Yeah, of course.
And always I pick something that keeps me in shape in a very short time.
Yeah.
And any fugue by Bach or Caprice by Paganini or just a scale in thirds or fingered octaves or so. if you can manage that, you're in decent shape, and you know.
Yeah, you don't need to worry about it
for the next day.
When playing at home, are you playing to, like you say, keep in shape and make sure you practice, or do you play for pleasure, or is it a combination of the two at this stage? Or
pleasure is a very important factor.
Right, okay.
I mean, the fun factor, or just, I mean, it's not called play the violin for nothing.
Yeah.
Nobody works the violin.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? I think this is very important in the approach to the instrument.
No, it's interesting. I mean, I was at university last year and then did my music degree, and when I was getting towards my recital, obviously I'm not a professional musician, so I don't have the same sort of mindset, I guess. I found it a struggle to every day have to sort of, it became a bit of a chore, and that's when I thought, wait a minute, I don't want that to be a chore, I want it to be pleasure. So then that's why I didn't go down the sort of, the musician route, whereas someone like yourself would play for pleasure and see it as work, so it's pleasure as well. So that's a nice thing, I guess, to really enjoy your job and see a job as pleasure as well, is it?
Well, as much as you possibly can.
Yeah,
of
course.
I think that's in terms of creativity in general. That's an interesting thing. Before we turned this on, we were talking about me being involved in the theatre. No matter how much you love it, when you're on the 7th tech rehearsal, it feels like work and it's a pain. I think it's interesting how even people with creative jobs, you hear like people when they do promotion and stuff, they refer to that as work, and you're sort of sat in an office thinking, well, doing an interview isn't work surely, but to them it is, and I think if you have a creative job, to a certain extent it becomes work. I think it's interesting where that
but I think
line is.
What all great musicians, I was lucky enough to meet a few, what they have in common, regardless of their chosen means of expression, you can play with vibrato or without vibrato, and Sir Roger is very intense about that, as we all know. But what they always share, what they have in common, is the ability to change their minds. And 1,000 times, we had a rehearsal and would work on a phrase for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, until it really came together and really made sense, and he was very pleased and said, thanks, gents, and see you tomorrow. And then we would show up the next day and what the devil is you doing? He said. Well, that's what we rehearsed yesterday. Well, it sounds like warmed up something, No, I changed my mind. Full stop. Period. So and that's very important too, I think.
Yeah.
To keep a fresh attitude and approach every time.
I mean, so you mentioned Sir Roger, and obviously he's our patron, and he conducted the concert in October. But I think what I feel makes Sir Roger so special is the fact that what you mentioned, he brings a fresh outlook to everything, doesn't he? To every piece of music. When you listen to a recording by him, it's completely different to many other ones that you hear. So what do you think it is that, obviously with that in mind, what do you think it is that makes him so special, and why do you think he wants to bring that fresh outlook to music?
Well, as I said before, the choice of material or choice of means of expression, like vibrato or other things, that's a deliberate choice everybody has to make. But what is more important, at least in my humble estimation, is always the intentions behind that. And if the intentions are right, the outcome will be very plausible and convincing.
Yeah, of course.
This is number one. Number two, good musicians, they never question, they never cease to question themselves, because we are human. There is failures down the road, and therefore you change your mind. If you find out there's a better way of doing it, you improve, constantly improve. And if you listen to, he's now in his 80s, believe it or not. It's hard to believe.
It's astounding.
He doesn't look or sound or behave like 80
at all.
He's
still going to
which
Japan
is brilliant. and if you listen to old records of Horowitz or, in his late period, it was pretty much the same. The older he got, it sounded more like play and less like work. And that's the key thing, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. So, I mean, we said you've played with Sinfonia for 10 years, or more than 10 years. And you've obviously had the pleasure, maybe, or not the pleasure, as it may be, of playing in lots of beautiful venues in England.
Yeah.
So Wells Cathedral, Bath Abbey, all that.
That comes to mind, exactly.
What is, do you think, your favourite venue, or what do you most like playing in, or the acoustics?
Well, every place has different properties. Wigmore Hall for chamber music recitals is just unbelievable.
I mean, what makes it? What is it? Makes it unbelievable?
Well, it's the warmth of sound and the detail and the articulation that we can achieve. And whilst, for instance, speaking of London venues, Royal Albert Hall Proms concert is just sensational for different reasons.
Yeah,
it's the atmosphere, it's the crowd, it's the proximity,
the relationship that's between the players and the audience.
Not the usual distance.
No, of course.
It's superb. But I agree, Welsh Cathedral and Bath Abbey, and I like to play in churches.
Yeah,
I mean, something about it.
Yeah, I mean, what is it about churches? Because obviously there's a lot of concerts that we do in churches. I mean, probably the vast majority of concerts we do are in churches. And I think, Chris, you did a blog about this as well, about venues a couple of weeks ago. But I mean, what is it about churches that makes it so nice to play in? Is it the acoustic? Is it the sort of the peaceful tranquility you get, and then you play music and it sort of upsets it? But I mean, what do you think it is about it?
Well, it certainly has to do with the atmosphere, I guess. The acoustic can be very helpful if it's for the right repertoire.
Yeah.
Or the right acoustics for that piece of music, actually that way around. If it's not, it can be a struggle.
Challenging,
to be very honest with you, but always you get that what did you say? That peaceful...
The tranquility.
Tranquility,
yeah.
Very good word. That's what it is.
I think because of the artwork on the walls, the stained glass windows, as well as tranquility, there's also a sense of grandeur, and the atmosphere can come from that as well.
Yeah, of course.
And I think people are... When even down to like the seating, people are they're not because it's with the wooden aisles and stuff. There's a certain sense of the audience being not on edge, as in nervous, but do you know what I mean? They're expecting something with a bit.
And it's very different because of course I went to a concert at Cadogan Hall a few weeks ago. And the seats there, I felt like I was sat on a sofa. Like, the seats there were unbelievably comfortable, and I was sort of sat back and relaxed and stuff. And then you go to a church, and it's a completely different experience, because pews aren't exactly the most comfortable seat to sit on, are they? No. So it's almost like you have to be more engaged because you're a bit more... So I don't know, I mean, it's different, isn't it?
I think that's a very good point you make, because the listening, the activeness in listening from the audience is of paramount importance to our performance. We tend to think that it's us who make music. First of all, the music is already there. We're just passengers, and we just make it happen, make it sound as best as we can. But it takes the audience and a very attentive listener to make it really happen. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, the more involved everybody gets from both sides, the better the experience for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, we're going back to Sir Roger. He's a real sort of, I think, exponent of connecting with the audience, isn't he, during concerts, and it makes you feel much more relatable to the orchestra, doesn't it? And you obviously that's a very important factor. So, I mean, how as a performer do you try and engage with the audience? What is it? I mean, in an orchestra, of course, with soloists, it's a little bit easier because you're out front and you are the main thing. But that's obviously a challenge, isn't it? I guess trying to do that.
It has to be balanced. Yeah. As a leader of an orchestra, there is only this and that you can do, or what you shouldn't do. I tend to exaggerate at times, but I rather like the idea that it's not some sort of a ceremony which is rigid and always the same shape.
It's got to be variation.
So,
and
exactly,
of course.
And you have to make understood that it's not work. At its best, it's play, interplay as well
between the two.
Exactly.
It's almost like a conversation, is that, I guess, but less of a conversation in that sense, in that it's not almost a two-way conversation because the audience aren't, apart from applause and visual expressions, they can't give anything back to the thing, so it's almost like a one-way conversation, isn't it?
And even as we know, you did a blog on it and we discussed it before, even applause is, in terms of that conversation, is debated in the classical music world about whether that should take place, and
I mean, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it. We I looked into on a previous blog into the reactions of audiences at concerts, and I feel like not recently, but over the last few years or so, there's been this sort of stigma attached to a classical concert, and that we all have to sit there in silence and not, even after a rousing sort of first movement of a symphony, maybe people don't feel they can clap. They feel they have to sit there in silence.
Yes. I know exactly
because
what you mean.
They don't want to interrupt the mood. I mean, what's your view? Would you like to see that as
I remember quite a few times when somebody wanted to applaud between two movements. And everybody around the person goes shh, and Sir Roger would turn around and encourage the person. Yes, if you like it, you show it. In the old days, in Mozart's days, in an opera performance, it would be like in a jazz club. If they liked the solo of the singer, they would just cheer and applaud in the middle of the piece.
And that's completely unfathomable, isn't it? You can't even imagine that nowadays, can you?
But I think it's so important that they are encouraged to applaud, especially bring younger and younger people into classical music. Younger people are so used, whether it's through technology or the way they interact, they're so used to immediately responding to something that you need to encourage them to clap so they don't feel like they can't give a response. It doesn't become a barrier.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point about young people, because we are so used to everything being on a plate in front of us immediately, aren't we? Now with Twitter and things, if people tweet about a concert that they're at, it's immediately there on your phone, even though if you're 700 miles away, And so it's a really interesting point you made there about young people. So, going back to you, Alex, just briefly, you're from Austria.
Yes.
That's where you live at the moment. Where do you live in Salzburg, is it? Or?
Not anymore. I spent more than 20 years in Salzburg, and that I felt was enough. Now we moved to the nice lake district near Lake Attersee, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And my wife's parents are there, and then when I'm on tour, we are eternally grateful for family.
Yeah, of course, it's very important.
Now the kids are 8 and 10 respectively, but when they were really small,
that must have been difficult.
I used to turn down so many people and rather not play and stay home when they were really tiny. And as a result, I don't play much.
So you're from Austria. Have you got a favourite? Have you got a preferred venue maybe in Austria that you've played in, or in Germany, or in France, or something? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Quite. Again, every hall has different properties. The big hall in Essen in Germany is superb. Something special about Vienna Musikverein, but also the Konzerthaus, when they refurbished everything and rebuilt it according to the old plans with a half-round stage. It sounds so much better than it used to in the old days.
Right.
One of my first concerts as a soloist with Mendelssohn Violin Concerto was in the old Konzerthaus, and it was really difficult because I was used to play in the living room with some resonance, and then I had the feeling when I take the bow off the string, the note would literally drop in front of my feet, and it's so discouraging for a young player. Now they made a fantastic job, and now it sounds really well.
Yeah.
And in a way more honest than the Konzerthaus as opposed to the Musikverein, because Musikverein always gives that silky, warm, well-blended
tone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was at university, like I mentioned, I had a final recital, and we did it in a theatre, a drama studio, it's called, and all around me on stage were curtains, huge curtains all the way around, and then it was the most dead sound I've ever played in, and like you say, it just dropped at my feet as soon as I played a note. And I had a piece where it was unaccompanied, I had to give atmosphere, and it was very hard to sort of imagine that the sound was going out, even though it felt like I was playing in a box where the box was by my nose, so it's very difficult. And that's obviously a challenge of playing in different venues, isn't it?
But interestingly, when we talked about violins, the most famous violins came from Italy. But the concert halls in Italy, they're not that helpful. Most of them are a bit dry and have a very short resonance. And I think that's interesting because people wanted to hear the actual sound. And what I said about Musikverein, Musikverein makes a great player a genius player, and an average player a great player.
Right.
Whilst in a very honest acoustics, you hear what you hear. And in a way, I prefer it that way.
And would you say you get that from churches?
Churches have that's the opposite end of the scale. Sometimes a very generous resonance, but in a way, yes, it's you can cover. Some people tend to think that you can cover certain problems in the articulation or in the togetherness, but actually you can't. You're quite exposed in a church because if something goes wrong, it goes on for the next 5 seconds.
Bounces back. So just finally, just thought I'd ask you, it might be a very difficult question, but we mentioned Sir Roger, who's obviously a very inspirational character. Have you got a musical person that you see as an inspiration, or when you were younger, when you were first learning the violin, was there a violinist that you really aspired to be like, or was it a conductor?
Well, more than one. Again, more than one.
Yeah.
What they all have in common is they are from the old school. There's different old schools,
right?
And the mix for me made it, and it's like a never-ending source of inspiration and knowledge, and it's the old timers that did it for me. Chandor Weg, and then the Frigidlis, and my own teacher, violin teacher Ruggero Ricci, who was a student of Louis Persinger, like Menuhin.
Mm-hmm.
And Persinger was a student of Eugene Isai, and we were in the middle of the 19th century. So it's only 1 or 2 steps away. And they all met Kreisler, and Kreisler played as a young boy for Brahms, and you know what I'm saying. And,
so you're very close to the classical period, aren't you?
Yeah.
It's weird, when you talk about when, you read about classical composers and the 19th century, I've never thought before about the fact that once you add in they taught so and so, they taught so, it becomes only a few steps away. That's
exactly.
Really
exactly. We tend to think it's a long time ago, but actually, if you think in generations, it's not.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for joining us, Alex. It's been
more than welcome.
Very
my pleasure.
Very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Cheers.